Hello, this is David McNabb, and you've tuned in to another episode of the Creation Corner. And this program is all about creation science. We've talked about what creation science is in the past and gone over some interesting information that we present about creation science through creation science, and had some really interesting guests. Before I introduce my guest today, and this is Prescott E-News you're on right now, and that's providing this show. So thank you for tuning in to Prescott E-News. I hope you'll look all around the site whenever you get a chance. Lots of good information on Prescott E-News. And I want to introduce just a few things on every show to give you an idea about what kind of resources are out there in creation science. This one is called The Puzzle of Ancient Man. And it's a real interesting book about a lot of things that happen in the far past that we can't understand or explain. So that's it kind of shows the intelligence of early man, and by early I mean 5,000-6,000 years ago. The Evolution Conspiracy, and it has two authors. Another good book here on what is behind the promotion of evolution and how did it become so ingrained in our educational system. And here's one called Creation and Evolution by Jay Seegert. Jay Seegert is a popular creation science speaker, goes around the country. In fact, he's going to be here in Prescott in a couple months, and I'll be letting you know about that when he gets closer to that time, when Jay will be here speaking. So a lot of good information on creation science out there, a lot of DVDs. If you want to explore any of that information, you can always contact me, and I'll be glad to put you in touch with this information where you can purchase some yourself. But my guest today is Steve Joannes, and Steve has a family insurance business. He's an agent there in Prescott Valley. And Steve, welcome to the show. How many years have you been an agent for American Family?
Thanks, Dave, for having me. I've been an agent with American Family for 24 years now.
24 here in Prescott Valley.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a long time. You've built up a lot of good relationships along the way, no doubt. With a lot of clients, and built up a good business there. And I know that because my son works for you.
Yeah, he does. He does.
And so I hear a lot of interesting things that go on there, and I just know it's a great business with a lot of integrity. And if someone is looking for insurance, wants to compare, maybe you don't like the insurance that you have right now, or it's too high or something, check with Steve at American Family Insurance in Prescott Valley. And he might be able to get you a better deal than what you have right now. Okay, so that's what you do for work. But you know, Steve, I am so impressed with what you've done spiritually in our community, because you've actually walked around all of Prescott Valley praying for it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
When did you do that?
Actually, I did that in 2016. I walked every street in Prescott Valley, praying for the people in that city, as well as handing out a Christian tract to every home.
And how long did it take you to walk around every street in Prescott Valley and pray for everyone?
Well, I did that with my wife and I together, and it took us 7 months.
Wow.
7 months. And that was doing it 6 days a week.
That is amazing. That is a great work that you took on yourself. That's grassroots Christianity. There was no church, no pastor telling him what to do. He went out there, found something good and worthwhile to do for the spiritual welfare of the community, and did it himself and with his wife, which I really commend you for. I mean, we need more Christians to do that kind of thing, to help us to get connected with God.
Yeah, well, obviously, I have a passion for people to know Christ, and I think He's the answer to the difficulties that we're facing in our nation right now, so I want everyone to be exposed to the gospel.
And you're doing an awesome job of that. And you mentioned passing out gospel tracts to every home in Prescott Valley, and now you've even come out of Prescott Valley because you've passed that to every home in Prescott Valley already.
Yes.
How many tracts would that be?
Well, right now I'd say it's about 35,000 tracts. There were 17,500 in Prescott Valley, and then I did a number of places in Dewey as well. Prescott Country Club, Quailwood, some mobile home developments and so on, and now I'm doing Prescott.
And you also did Diamond Valley.
Yeah, well, Diamond Valley's part of Prescott.
It's part of Prescott, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. And so now you're working on Prescott. So that is just amazing that you're spending that kind of time and effort to reach out with the gospel to everyone in Prescott Valley, Dewey, and Prescott. I'm amazed. I really am. I just can't commend you enough with that kind of effort that you're putting out and expense. You don't have anybody funding this, do you?
No, I fund it myself.
So there's a lot of expense to that many tracts.
Yeah.
So
It takes
so that
money.
takes quite a bit of money, and it's just that takes a lot of commitment to put that kind of money and time and effort into reaching out with Christ to everyone in our community, and I just love that about you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dave. I appreciate it.
Okay, tell us a little bit about your background and where were you educated, and when did you come to Prescott, and why did you come to Prescott?
Well, I grew up in Southern California. Went to Biola University on a wrestling scholarship, and so graduated from Biola University. Moved out here to Prescott in 1977, along with my wife, and so we've lived here since 1977, 43 years, and I've had a number of jobs along the way, but obviously since I got started with American Family Insurance, that's been something that's been real stable for me. Okay,
real good. And so now, when you first came out here, weren't you involved in some kind of a ministry as well?
Yeah, I was on a Christian, I was involved with a Christian athletic ministry. We trained professional athletes and other collegiate athletes on how to compete using biblical principles. So
wow.
Basically using the Bible and the example of Jesus to show how we should compete as an athlete today.
Wow. That is really neat. And how long did you do that for?
I was on staff with them for 3 years, and then they moved the ministry to Missouri, and my wife and I decided, we had started a family here and just decided to stay here in Prescott.
Oh man, that is awesome. Now, how did you become involved with creation science?
I don't know exactly how I became involved. I've just studied the scriptures for many, many years. I believe that the Bible is our authority in every realm of interest. And as I started reading, I do remember reading at Biola, The Genesis Flood by John Whitcomb and Henry Morris.
Really?
And that was a book that dramatically changed my whole thinking because I'd never heard anything on creation until I read that book.
I've mentioned that book a few times on different episodes of the Creation Corner because that was the book that started a proliferation of creation science teachers, speakers, and materials.
Right.
It was 1961 when that book came out.
Yeah.
Do you remember what class you read that for?
That was for the Old Testament, I think, a class on the Old Testament.
Did they have any apologetics classes back then?
I don't think we had any apologetics at the time, no. No. That would have been in 1973 that I read that book.
Okay.
But that was very instrumental in changing my thinking because I'd never heard anything about creation related to evolution until then.
Yes. And that's by Dr. John Morris and Dr. James Whitcomb.
Yeah. Or John Whitcomb and Henry Morris.
Oh, Henry Morris and John Whitcomb, that's right.
Yeah.
And they're both professors, and Henry Morris then started the Institute for Creation Research.
Right.
But he was very well known after that book became popular. Mm-hmm. And that really started things going with creation science here in America, and then blossomed to Europe and around the world. So what involvement with creation science and have you had here? I know you really got me started thinking about it when you showed the Kent Hovind seminar series at Embry-Riddle University.
Yeah.
And so tell us about that.
Well, myself and a friend just wanted to get people exposed to this creation evolution set of information, and I ran across a series of videos by Kent Hovind on that subject, and we decided to rent the facility there at Embry-Riddle and try and show the movies to the general public. We didn't get a very large response, not a lot of people came, but you came, so that was a good thing.
Yes, the seminars were very enlightening to me because I hadn't heard most of that information at that time.
Right.
And I was just very turned on about learning more after hearing the Kent Hovind seminar series. And you know, I just think what would have happened had a lot of college students come to hear those. I think a lot of them would have changed their whole world view.
Well, I think it's a very transformational series, and Kent Hovind has a great deal of wit and humor that he uses in his teaching, so I think it would have been something relevant for them. We just didn't get a very large turnout.
Yeah, and it's hard to get students to turn out for anything, especially if there's not food involved.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah.
So I know how that goes.
Yeah.
But tell us why shouldn't Christians accept the millions and billions of years deep time concept that's taught so often in every public school?
Well, my own opinion is that, first of all, it's not real science. Science does not support millions of years of time. It would be considered pseudoscience. A lot of the philosophies that are used to add millions of years are, again, they're just not based on observational information. It's more ideological than it is scientific.
Yes. Okay, tell us about the book that you brought today.
Well, I brought a book by Answers in Genesis and Ken Ham. It's called the New Answers book. There's actually 4 books in the series, and this is the first of those 4. And I brought this because it does deal with a lot of the questions about answers to the creation perspective from looking at the Bible.
Okay, give us some of the information that's in the book there.
Well, obviously, the chapter that I was looking at is why shouldn't Christians accept millions of years? And again, it's taught today in our universities and colleges, but it's not based on scientific evidence. So there are a number of theories like the day-age theory, the progressive creation theory, the theistic evolution, and the gap theory, and so on. And all of these, again, are based on assumptions. They're not based on scientific evidence. And so they try, many people, and Christians, unfortunately, have conceded to these theories and now try and fit millions of years into the Bible. Mm-hmm. And obviously, the Bible doesn't leave room to do that.
Yeah, and that's because we tend to want to accept man's word over God's word.
Exactly.
Isn't it? And,
sure.
And it's also because it's so pervasive in our society that we hear it on the radio and on the TV and on the internet, and we definitely hear it in public school, right? Millions and billions of years. It's everywhere. The movies we watch.
Sure.
So if people are always talking about it like it's a fact and you don't believe it, then you're the oddball.
Correct. Yeah.
Right?
That's certainly true.
Okay, so give us some of the reasons why we should not believe in this stuff.
Well, again, according to the Bible, if we believe the Bible, and if the Bible is our authority, which I believe it is, then the Bible would definitely speak against millions of years. And the chapter here gives 10 reasons, and there are more than that, but these 10 reasons certainly give us something to chew on in terms of reasons why we don't have to believe in millions of years of time. The first would be simply the use of the word yom. in the Old Testament. The word yom is used to describe the word day, and in most cases in the Old Testament it is used to describe a literal day. It can be used to describe an age or a period of time, but the primary use of it is a literal day. And it's used in Genesis 1 in conjunction with evening and morning, because the Bible describes each of the days of Genesis and says that the evening and the morning were one day. Well, a day has an evening and a morning.
Right.
And so...
Does it have a million years?
It doesn't have a million years.
Oh, man!
And so, obviously, a literal interpretation of the evening and morning would be a literal day.
Sure.
And the other thing that makes the word day a literal day is that in Genesis chapter 1, the word day is always used with an ordinal or with a number. The first day, the second day, the third day. Mm-hmm. Every time you use the word day with a number in front of it, it is referring to a literal day. It can't be referring to an age or period of time. Exactly. And so the Bible supports the fact that it's a literal day. And even Hebrew scholars that don't believe in necessarily a literal interpretation of the Bible would say that clearly the Bible is supporting a literal day.
Yes, that's right. So, even if they don't want to believe in it and don't decide, I'm not going to believe in it, they still will recognize that and admit it.
Sure.
That exactly. And you know, that's where we got our week from. The 7 days of creation.
Sure.
From the Bible. The month and the year comes from astronomical methods, but the week comes from the Bible.
Yeah.
And those are literal days. Yeah, you're right. Now, what about some of the scientific evidences that a deep time is not real?
Well, I wasn't going to talk necessarily about a lot of the scientific evidences. There are many. There's dozens and dozens of them, hundreds perhaps. Yes. But I was simply going to mention some of the things that the Bible teaches that support the fact that Genesis and the Bible itself cannot be referring to millions of years of time. One, or the third example given here is the genealogies of Genesis 5 and Genesis 11. The genealogies specifically give numbers of years. You can add those up, and the adding of those years only creates 4,000 or 5,000 years of time. Mm-hmm. You can't have millions of years if, in fact, those genealogies are true.
Right.
And so if they are true, millions of years is debunked.
That's right. Yeah. And I noticed that before the flood, people lived a whole lot longer than after the flood. Why is that?
Well, obviously, the world before the flood, according to the Bible, was quite a bit different than the world that we live in today.
Yes.
The atmosphere on Earth was different. Many believe that there was a water canopy surrounding the Earth that would have created sort of a greenhouse effect on Earth, creating life very conducive to long ages. I mean, oxygen levels would have been higher, the air pressure on Earth would have been greater. There would have been a lot of reasons for people to live a lot longer life.
And it would have, that canopy that you mentioned would have filtered out the harmful effects of the rays,
sure.
The rays of the sun.
Sure.
Which deteriorates people quite a bit and limits our age.
Yeah, yeah. My wrinkles are a pretty good example of the fact that the sun causes you to deteriorate very quickly.
It does, it does. Okay, what's the next thing?
Well, there's another chapter in the Bible, in Exodus, that describes the fact that it describes the creation account, and it says that God created the world in 7 days. And it describes each of those days as literal days because on the seventh day, it says God rested. And God used the seventh day as an example that we are to rest on the seventh day. If those days were ages or millions of years of time...
So he didn't rest for 1 billion years?
Yeah, no.
Okay, glad you cleared that up.
Yeah.
I was wondering.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and now that verse you mentioned in Exodus 20,
Verses 9 through 11, I think is what it is.
2011, right?
Yeah, 2011.
The fourth commandment, where it's talking about the Sabbath day. And God mentions in there that, hey, I made everything in 6 days. Everything that crawls on the land and swims in the sea, I made in 6 days.
Right.
And on the seventh day I rested. Therefore, you rest. Keep that day holy. Right?
Yeah.
So that was the point of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And God wrote that with his own hand on stone, and he doesn't stutter. Right?
That's true. Very true.
Okay. Well, that's a very powerful verse that people should be aware of when we're talking about the age of the earth. What else you got?
Well, obviously the Noahic flood in Genesis 6 through 9 indicate that if the flood were a true event, which obviously we believe it is, if the flood were a true event, the 40 days of rain and the uplifting of the fountains of the great deep would have catastrophically affected the terrain on planet Earth and would have laid down many, many layers of rock. And so many scientists today claim that those layers of rock, based on the geologic column, refer to millions of years of time. But if the flood is true, those rocks and those layers would have been laid down in a very short period of time because of the catastrophe of the flood.
Yeah.
And so the flood obviously is a good example of the fact that those layers on Earth are very, very young and were laid down over a 1-year period of time during the flood.
That's right, which is why the secular evolutionary scientists do not want to admit there was a worldwide flood, even though there are millions of marine fossils on top of every high mountain. And the most common marine fossil is a clam, and those clams are found with closed. They're in closed position. Didn't have time even to die and open up the shells.
Right.
That's how quickly they were died and deposited where we find them.
Yeah, and in fact, those clams have been found on Mount Everest, the top of Mount Everest.
That's right.
So clams are not really very good climbers.
That's right.
So they wouldn't be able to climb up to the top of Mount Everest. They had to have been placed on Everest, and then the mountains raised up after the fact.
Yeah, and we don't know how tall those mountains were at the time of the flood. They certainly were not as tall as they are today.
Correct.
But they were they may have just been hills or smaller mountains, but they were raised up, like you mentioned, at the time of the flood because there was so much earth and upheaval going on in the earth at that time, with a lot of volcanic activity, which heated the oceans and caused a lot of evaporation to occur, which then caused the ice age. Which Christian scientists believe there was only one ice age, and that it lasted between 300 and 500 years after the flood because of this volcanic activity that warmed the oceans.
Sure.
Okay. And what else you got there?
Well, obviously, Jesus was a young earth creationist. If you believe the Bible, Jesus said in Mark 10:6 that Adam and Eve were made at the beginning of the creation. So if the creation existed millions of years before Adam and Eve, certainly Adam and Eve wouldn't be at the beginning of creation.
That's right. So Jesus obviously believed in a young earth creation, so shouldn't his followers believe that too?
Well, sure. 2 John 9 says, if anyone goes too far and does not abide in the teaching of Christ, he doesn't have Christ or God. And so, obviously, whatever Jesus taught is true. Jesus taught that Jonah was in the belly of a large fish, that Noah's flood occurred, that Lot and his wife fled from Sodom and Gomorrah, that these were all literal accounts of events that took place. And so, whatever Jesus teaches, obviously, we ought to hold to if we're following him.
Yes. So Jesus believed in the historical veracity of the Old Testament, including Adam and Eve in the garden, and that was the beginning of all history on earth right there.
That's right.
Good, good, good. What else?
Let's see, there's a couple other things here. Well, obviously, the teaching of if you believe in millions of years, then what you have to believe is that death and suffering took place millions of years before Adam and Eve were ever created,
yes.
which completely negates the Bible's teaching about death and suffering. Because according to Genesis 3, death occurred as a result of the sin of Adam in the Garden of Eden. And so if that's not true, and millions of years occurred with death and suffering, then the Bible is irrelevant. And in fact, you can also say that the gospel is no longer relevant as well.
Okay, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that really is the foundation of our faith.
Sure.
And that is, if there was no literal garden with no literal Adam and Eve that didn't literally commit the first original sin, which broke the relationship between man and God, which created the need for a Savior to redeem us back to God.
Exactly.
Right? Isn't that the foundation of the faith?
Yes. That's
so
right.
How can we even have a faith if we don't believe in the foundation?
Right. If you believe in millions of years of time, you negate the redemption of Christ and his need to die on the cross for the sins of the world, because death and suffering occurred before Adam and Eve.
Yes. And you know, that's such an important point. And I hope that the Christians that are watching gets that point. That's very, very important. Talk to your pastor about it if you're going to church. If you need a church recommend, give myself or Steve a call. We know most all the churches and pastors in this area, and we'll be glad to recommend church for you to go to, as well as creation materials. Steve, do you want to leave us with anything else before we sign off?
I guess I would just say in conclusion that the real issue is the authority of God's Word. Do we believe the Bible authoritatively speaks on every subject that it speaks on, or do we just go with whatever science says at a given time? And I believe that Jesus spoke with authority, the Bible speaks with authority, and we can trust it as an accurate revelation of the truth about history.
That is a great point to end on, because biblical authority is what really the creation science is about. It's not about presenting all this information to overwhelm and convince you that the Bible is true, or that Earth is young and the universe is young. It's about showing that the Bible is the authority, not man's word. That's what creation science is really about. You know, there's a great creation science message that goes like this: nothing is too absurd to be believed if it is repeated enough. And we get evolution and deep time repeated to us all the time, especially students. You know, they hear it all the time. It's estimated that by the time you graduate high school, you're going to have heard that evolution is true at least 10,000 times. But nothing is too absurd to be believed if it is repeated enough. So they believe it.
Yeah.
Right?
I think Adolf Hitler made that statement in Mein Kampf, when he said that if you tell a lie and you tell it long enough and often enough, and the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. And
That's
certainly evolution has become a lie that's accepted by our culture today.
It's the main cultural lie that we have to face and deal with, and that's the purpose of our program, The Creation Corner. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Steve Joannes, for being my guest today. You're very welcome to contact either one of us. We'd love to hear from you, and God bless. Until next time.